Good evening. I know this is kind of late. A lot of things happened today, so we wanted to give an opportunity to hear from some of the commanders who were on the scene tonight in East Liberty and Shadyside, as well as hear from the director and the chief and the mayor, and then to allow you all to ask some questions. So we're going to start with Zone 5 Commander Stephen Vinansky and Narcotics and Vice Commander Jason Lando, both of whom were on scene. And we'll start with Commander Lando first.
Thanks, Chris. This evening, right around 7 o'clock, as the peaceful protest was breaking up and people were filtering out of the area, there was an incident that occurred in the area of Sneaker Villa and Dollar Bank in the 6100 block of Penn Avenue. We could hear, it appeared to be a scuffle. We could hear some screaming. We looked over, and it appeared that a small group of agitators inserted themselves into the crowd and attempted to break the windows out of the Dollar Bank and also damage the windows to the Sneaker Villa. As we attempted to intervene in that, a group of people went after a KDKA reporter and camera person. As we approached the KDKA crew to make sure they were okay and to keep them from getting attacked, a peaceful protester actually beat us to it and inserted himself into the group and broke it up, directing the agitators to go in the other direction. Sadly, at that point, those individuals regrouped and began marching inbound on Center Avenue. At that point in time, we requested some assistance in the form of tactical support. From that point, our tactical support units went down to Center Avenue at North Negley, that intersection there at North Negley and South Negley, and they went down there to just make sure everything was under control and that the agitators didn't cause any property damage as they marched. At some point in time, people within the group began throwing rocks at our officers, and people in the Essex House apartments began throwing water bottles down onto our officers. And at that point in time, the decision was made to make dispersal orders over the PA system. Numerous orders were given over the PA system. I heard at least 5 orders given, and ample time for people to disperse. But instead, people within the group continued to throw rocks at our officers and water bottles. And at that point in time, the tactical commander gave authorization for us to use smoke. Some people think that it was tear gas. It was not. It was smoke that was thrown in an effort to get individuals to disperse. And at that point, I'd like to just turn it over to Commander Vinansky.
Okay. Good evening, Stephen Vinansky, Commander Zone 5. Earlier in the day, I had watched the peaceful protest stage at approximately 2 o'clock p.m. And at that time, there were probably 10 to 15 protesters peacefully standing on a sidewalk. The numbers grew. Probably at around 3:30, there may have been around 300 protesters who gathered and started to march. The group grew in size to possibly close to 1,000. We followed the march for 3 hours, and it was peaceful. Everything was peaceful up until that point. However, I walked a good part of the parade route, and there were a lot of people who were showing us a lot of support, thanking us for accommodating the protests, but also indicating to us that there were several individuals in the crowd who they were concerned about, who they thought might turn the protests bad. Approximately 7 o'clock, we saw a completely different type of situation. The peaceful protesters were leaving, and we heard reports of the Sneaker Villa with the window broken out and the Dollar Bank window broken out. I quickly got to that location, observed the windows broken out. There were several people in the crowd that were very upset, saying that the group that did it was not with them. We had assistance from our tactical teams to move in and follow that crowd. And I heard on the radio then several of our officers having rocks thrown at them and bottles. My concern was for other officers in the area and for citizens and for businesses, and mostly for the protection of everybody who else was in East Liberty, to try to find where the crowd was moving as they were starting to disperse. As I was coming down Penn Avenue and turned right onto Euclid, I approached the intersection of Baum Boulevard saw a group of protesters who were probably close to 100 in size. I saw one female with a baseball bat in her bag, and many other protesters. They were starting to block the intersection. I was by myself, and before I could get on the air to call for backup, the crowd quickly turned on me, started chasing me in my vehicle. I quickly turned around. They started throwing objects, rocks, and so forth. Fortunately, the vehicle was not struck. There were approximately 3 or 4 vehicles which I turned around the wrong way on Euclid to get them out of harm's way, and then blocked the intersection of Euclid and Penn. And the crowd quickly surrounded my car, screaming obscenities, and you could see the anger and distaste in their voice, and they crossed over Euclid down towards the McDonald's, and quickly our units got on scene to assist from there. Thank you.
Chief and Director.
And throw some numbers and stats. We spoke earlier in the day, and I will share with you that throughout the last several days we were receiving intelligence that there was going to be basically businesses destroyed and looted in the East Liberty area, to include the Target store, and we appropriately prepared for what happened tonight. We had tonight 9 officers injured, which included rocks and bricks being tossed at their heads, chest, pelvis areas, knees, and shoulders. All the officers were evaluated and released from various medical facilities. We had at least 4 windows that were broken. However, it appears that there have been no businesses that have been looted or burglarized as of yet. 2 protesters were transported to the hospital complaining of injuries sustained from beanbags. Right now, preliminarily, we have 20 arrests, which include 4 from outside the state. And I just want to mention that the work that was done by the officers, paramedics tonight, should be commended. We are seeing what's happening in a lot of the other cities, and I think we prevented businesses from being looted and possibly set afire. So I just want to commend all the public safety, the different law enforcement agencies that were out there tonight, and I think the public, they should be thanking the police officers for the work that they've done. And fortunately, the injuries they received could have very well been a lot worse than what they've experienced. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Schubert.
Good evening. I went out there as well. I left here to go out and just see what was going on out in the field myself. And as we talked a couple times before, we're seeing where we have peaceful protests going on, people who are out there doing their First Amendment right. And then it turns over to we have people who don't want to do that. They want to turn it into criminal behavior and cause damage and harm people. And that's exactly what we saw again tonight. You had well over 1,000 people, and we'd have kept going for longer if they wanted to, as long as we could keep it safe for them. But I know one of the organizers came back and wanted everybody to get away and go home because of some of the people who had shown up and wanted to cause harm. We had information to include a flyer where they were going to loot East Liberty at 8 o'clock. And here this is after 7 o'clock that this is going on. And it was coming to fruition. People left, and the group started milling in front of the Target. And all this stuff starts happening, as Commander Lando and Commander Vanansky talked about. One of the people they were able to see had a sledgehammer. One had bolt cutters. Others carrying sticks. You see these backpacks that are, going down their backs. They're not going to a picnic. They're throwing rocks and bricks at our officers. We want people to protest. We want them to be able to utilize their fundamental First Amendment rights out on the streets. and we're there to keep everybody safe. That's what we want to do. And they keep changing it, this particular segment of the group, to turn it into something else. And we can't have people going around committing criminal acts, harming people, destroying property, or looting places in the city of Pittsburgh. And we weren't going to let that happen in East Liberty when it started folding out to coming to fruition of what the intel we saw. And I give a lot of credit to the officers that were there because I watched them, did an incredible job. And they did an incredible job trying to keep the public safe while they were out there. They recognized the terrain they were in and using the smoke to help so it didn't contaminate other people who were there. And driving and pushing. You know what they had to do? Leave. That's all they had to do. They didn't even have to get arrested. They just needed to leave. And they chose not to do it. They chose to keep coming back. They chose to throw rocks and bricks over the heads of other protesters at our officers. And we're not going to have it. So, you know, I think we did a good job of what occurred tonight, of keeping people safe. Unfortunately, 9 of our officers were hurt because of this. But, you know, we're going to do everything we can to keep the city of Pittsburgh safe and keep our officers safe. And that's just who we are. I mean, we're Pittsburghers, and we're gonna make sure we keep Pittsburgh safe.
I was there from 4 till 7, and basically what I did was traveled from the different locations as the marchers made their way, and I witnessed peace. I witnessed organization of community leaders joined by others that were working together throughout that entire 3-hour period. What ended up happening from 7 until 8 was very different, and it's very much what we saw what happened on Saturday once it had gone up to PPG. The different groups separated. The vast majority of the people went home. They had accomplished their march, but some decided to stay. And from that, there were separate groups, some down by the heart of the East Liberty Business District, around Sneaka Villa and Dollar Bank, others that were going up past Whole Foods towards Negley on Center Avenue, and some others scattered. And in each of these different areas, there was violence and destruction that was a part of it. As the commander told me, and I was not aware, after the first volley of bricks at police officers, the lieutenant on duty said, "It looks like they're calming down. Before we put smoke in," and again, it was smoke, not gas, "before we put smoke in, I'm going to just call out another order to leave." That it was, at that point, had become an unlawful assembly, and they were told this. After he did that, they came back again and threw more bricks at police officers. It wasn't until after those that the smoke was released. And after continual warnings to leave, where people would not leave, and they were told that they wouldn't leave, and they continued to cause damage, it was then that the officers escalated to the point of being able to break the crowd up. And that finally succeeded. What we did not see is East Liberty is not on fire tonight. People from East Liberty are not harmed. 2 protesters were taken for evaluation, and they should be absolutely fine. 9 officers were hurt by protesters. At what point do we not take a response that helps to protect the community and the officers that are just doing their job in order to keep peace? We just say no as people come from out of state into our neighborhoods in order to destroy our neighborhoods, to burn East Liberty down? We allow this as just part of the cost we have to pay. They're not even part of the protest, and the organizers of the protest themselves were working with our Pittsburgh police in order to identify who those troublemakers are. And yet again, they want to change the story. They were the ones who were victimized. After they throw rocks and bricks at police officers, take on a commander in his vehicle, smash in windows of our local businesses, and yet they're the victims. At what point do you just say, they're telling me I have to leave, maybe I should leave. And maybe I won't spend the night in jail. And maybe I won't be in harm's way. And for people who wanted to see what was happening, at what point do you say this might not be a proper situation for me or my children to be at? When there's a riot going on, there shouldn't be people wanting to be witnesses. We should all be saying, those are folks that we don't want to be part of our movement. Those are folks we don't want to be part of our march. Those are folks we don't want to be associated with, instead of standing shoulder to shoulder with them. You empower them to do these types of activities when you stand there and then blame the police for responding. So the question is that there are so many people there, and they said that's not how it happened. It went down a very different way. So I've ordered the police chief to transcribe all of the Emergency Operation Command communications from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. this evening, and to provide that to me tomorrow. Can I provide it to the media? No. 2 reasons. Number one is just on the basis of critical information on the operations side during an emergency. And the second is contractually with the FOP that we do not have the right to release information if there is to be an investigation or if it's an ongoing investigation. However, this is what I was elected to do. And I was elected to look at documents like this in order to be able to make decisions based upon facts and not emotions. And I will look at that information tomorrow, and I will sit with the chief, and I will sit with the public safety director, and we'll go through line by line the order and the sequence of everything that happened this evening. And if there is anything that has deviated from what you were told tonight, I will be bringing it up directly and calling for accountability from the chief and the public safety director. That is my job. My job is not to respond to Twitter conspiracy theories, to people who weren't even there, who are writing and saying what happened, or to those who were there but were only in one spot for a brief moment and did not have knowledge of everything happening around them or in all of the parts of East Liberty this evening. And I will be fair in that judgment. I go into this with only one concern: the safety of the people of Pittsburgh, and that they're being served properly by the Pittsburgh Police Department. So I want this to also be an opportunity, because you had reporters there all day. They saw and they were a part of what happened, to be able to ask anybody who is directly involved in the command of the operations for today, anybody who was on the ground or in any other position who was involved in that sequence of events, the opportunity for the media to ask before the sun rises tomorrow.
The event today.
I think that it's a little too early in the investigation. I mean, they're being interviewed. Yeah, some of them are talking, some of them are not talking. But I think that that's a question that's probably going to be better answered tomorrow or the next day. I mean, this is just preliminary information. And I will say that it appears that at least several of them were not part of the peaceful side. They had intentions to do exactly what the mayor said, and that was what the intelligence we had received. It was determined that these, obviously they were there throwing bricks, and it appeared that they were basically going to break into businesses and destroy the businesses, and they had to be stopped. You know, you're seeing these cities that you know, the event is going on late into the night, and we established a curfew, and right now we are still throughout the night going to maintain a strong police presence throughout the city of Pittsburgh. And as I mentioned before, we have a lot of assets in here, you know, thanks to the state police, thanks to the county, thanks to the Pittsburgh police and all the training they've received. They've worked together, and unfortunately, the training that they learned last year in the Rossfield trial, I mean, we were lucky, and you know, those protesters, which are part of the protest that's going on here, we didn't have the outsiders, and if we did, they didn't act. And this one here, from what we're seeing is it's the outsiders that are not here for a peaceful protest that are, and it's a small minority. The ones that were peaceful, they dispersed. And a lot of them dispersed even before the orders were given. And I sat up there and watched it while the commanders, the chief, the mayor, they were out there. They witnessed it firsthand. I watched, and I mean, I watched the commander here, and I mean, the orders were given just as we practice what is written in policy. The orders were given over and over again, and they refused to leave. And like I said, we had a cameraman on Saturday attacked, and we had one tonight attacked, and we had to put a stop to it.
I understand.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely impacts it. I was actually standing out there on Center Avenue, you know, several yards behind our tactical team that was obviously more heavily geared up than I was. And you could see people from the balconies of the Essex House throwing full water bottles down on our officers. Water bottles might not seem like a lot when you think about it, but when you're throwing them from 10 stories up on officers that are trying to focus on the crowd, it's very dangerous. You know, the other day we had officers hit in the head with rocks. Today, rocks, water bottles. But it was very disappointing to see, because they're not even part of the protest. You know, they're up there spectating, and they're assaulting our officers. And that just kind of elevates the situation for us and elevates the need for us to act. We're in a very dangerous situation tactically, because not only do you have the protesters to deal with head on, but you have now people in an apartment building throwing things down on you. So I think if anything, that just kind of made the situation, you know, even more dangerous for our officers.
I think we'll reassess it first thing tomorrow morning. Right now, there's no intel of any problems for tomorrow. I mean, we certainly, and you know, it's the decision of the mayor, but I mean, this is not something we want to keep going on and on and on. I mean, if we have intel, and that's why we had the curfew tonight, because of the intelligence, because we believed there was going to be problems. But I mean, we certainly don't want to extend it any longer than we feel necessary. And you know, so we'll discuss this tomorrow morning. We have to look at, number one, any intel that is developed overnight. And I mean, you know, it's not only the Pittsburgh Police Intel Unit. I mean, it's Region 13, the Fusion Center, the FBI, Homeland Security, and we'll reevaluate it first thing tomorrow morning. Mayor, you have anything?
Talk to you about it tomorrow.
Okay.
So when we talk about splinter groups, sometimes it's organized and sometimes it's not. Tonight and on Saturday, we believe we had both of those elements. We do believe there's some organization from outsiders. If you look at the history and recent history of protests in Pittsburgh, Pittsburghers like to protest and express their First Amendment rights. We support that fully. We use our motorcycles to block intersections so they can get through them safely. Then you have a group that comes in there and they try and tip it. They deliberately plan these things. And you got some that are just naturally looking for trouble. They might not be part of the organized group, and they
the splinter comes in too, because they're not part of the main group, they're not welcomed by the main group, and then they splinter off and go start causing problems. And we saw that very thing tonight. Outsiders, at least 4 people we arrested are not even from Pennsylvania, and we're still processing through that. So our Pittsburghers, they express their First Amendment rights very peacefully. We had several of those events over the last couple of days with no issues whatsoever. It seems to be outside agitators, whether they're from outside of the city or even outside of the state, and we've seen both of that seem to be driving most of these problems.
Do you think that they use and break stuff, or?
I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and I don't think they care about the cause of the tragedy in Minneapolis at all. I think they're using it as an opportunity to push a far different agenda. Some of it's pure anarchy. So there's a lot of different things in play here, but I do not believe they care about the cause at all, because I believe, and talking to some of the protesters, they believe that they're drowning out the real message that needs to be out. What happened up in Minneapolis was revolting, it was sickening, and it should never have happened, and change needs to happen. That kind of stuff cannot be tolerated in this country. And that's the message people are trying to get out there, and we fully support that message. And then you have people that are trying to hijack that for some entirely different purposes.
Regards to crowd munitions that are used to help manage or control the crowd, were they used tonight? No, they weren't. We did use gas on Saturday night, which you all saw. I would encourage the media to kind of take a look at the footage from the perspective of what they saw in the beginning to the end. You saw that those splinter groups or these factions break off. Crowd munitions are an escalation of forces necessary to protect innocent bystanders or to protect infrastructure, in this case, businesses, city buildings, etc. Tonight, we used smoke as a crowd management tool, psychological diversion tool for the crowd, because of their interaction with us since Saturday, and some of these people were repeat individuals, anticipated the deployment of smoke along with chemical munitions. So their reaction, and the reaction that we got, was immediate flight into the neighborhoods, which pushed them out of between two apartment buildings. Unfortunately, like Commander Lando had talked about, that the people took an opportunity in those particular structures to join the crowd, making it more dangerous for the officers. So that obscurant, in this case the use of smoke, helped protect the officers from those throwing bottles up that they couldn't actually get visual identification of the officers on the ground, and caused that particular crowd that was there to move out of that area, which was a dangerous environment and terrain for the officers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do that on us, or is that? I get that.
No, well, I think it's more flipped than in the case that what we saw last night at Eastminster, when a group came in of anarchists, and an elder from one of the 10 churches went over and said this is a peaceful event, and they were asked to leave. What you're seeing is the community that is organizing these marches on behalf of Black Lives Matter and on behalf of social justice and police reform recognize that the people that are showing up are only there to cause damage and to try to hurt police officers. And they realize that their movement is being harmed by the very presence of these anarchists. And so what we saw tonight was organizers of this march finding our commanders and saying, this group over here, watch them. This person over here, be careful. We got your back if this person does anything. And coming to the police and asking the police to help them to keep their march peaceful. And so what you're seeing, and if you start looking about what's happening around this country right now, the exact same thing. In Washington, D.C., where the anarchist was sitting on the ground with a hammer, breaking out a granite curb in order to get big chunks to throw at police officers, the organizers of the march grabbed him, tackled him, and threw him to the police. They've worn out their welcome. They wore out their welcome tonight in East Liberty. They wore out their welcome downtown. And in both instances, they took a peaceful experiment of American democracy, a peaceful way for people to have their voice represented, and selfishly took it for their own mission of destruction and chaos.
But it's got to be hard to vet every splinter group. You know, sometimes they just look like normal people.
Well, the more that they do their activities, everything is always being filmed. So we're going to have an incredible database of those individuals who are showing up to these peace marches in order to cause harm. And we'll rely upon the community to help to identify who they are if they're from Pittsburgh. And if they're coming in from this region or from other states like this evening, then we'll work with the FBI in order to be able to identify them as well. So the more that they show up, the more that they're helping us to identify them.
All right. Any more?
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for coming out, guys.